Our illustrious protagonist. And tonight we have a woman named Linda Maynard here, who is a mental health professional, and she's agreed to have a discussion, help us kind of process all of this. And I have some questions for her about theatrical techniques and how they might be used in addressing mental health. So bear with me, this is the first time I've run a panel, so I'm improvising as well. Good luck. Thank you. So Linda, real quick to begin, tell us a little bit about your background.
Glad to be here this evening and wonderful to meet you all and to participate in this amazing adventure we've just had. I am a social worker by profession, and I've been in this job or in this field for many, many years. And you know, it's said in the literature about helping professions that the people who go into helping professions are the ones who need help. And I qualify. And so my journey has been one of learning how to be of service, to help people find what they need to find peace within their lives and their minds and their hearts. And I believe that the reason I followed this path was because that's what I was looking for as a child growing up, and where I was, and the child of two alcoholic parents. And it was a journey of not knowing where or when or what was going to happen next, and wanting somebody to stop being so angry and just be there and available. And that never happened in my family. And it was something that I felt so strongly that when I learned about and read about social work and mental health, I realized that's something I know a lot about. Health and ill health, as a matter of fact. So I started out working at departments of social services in different locations. I worked as a coordinator for children in North Carolina. Some of you might have heard about the Willie M. children. And years ago in North Carolina was sued by the federal government for failure to provide treatment for emotionally disturbed, mentally ill, violent and aggressive children. And I was put in that position of coordinating and creating a program to serve those children and their parents. And that's kind of where I really began to get into the degree, as was brought out tonight, the degree, the intensity of the pain and the despair that were in those families. And North Carolina, they put a lot of money into it, but nobody knew what they were doing. And nobody still knows what they're doing. Because we don't know, we don't know how to be there and support and provide what is missing in the family. Because we're not in the family. And we can't be there all the time to help the parent, help the mom, help the kid, put it together and keep it rolling. Because the world is such an interfering quality that anything can happen in their family, in their neighbor's family, in their parents' jobs. It's just constantly in flux. It's constantly flowing and moving in every direction. So my job, as I see it, has been one of helping people talk that through, identifying it, and as was said tonight, if we don't talk about it, we can't heal it. It has to be shared. It has to be talked about. And that's what a lot of mental health practice is not so much that I have something that you need to have. It's that I know we need to talk about it, and most of the time, most people don't want to talk about it.
You're willing, you're available for it.
Exactly.
and so few people are.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I was particularly curious about, I do a lot of teaching, but my theatrical training has led me to role play. Usually in corporations, for people, for business communication, that sort of thing, but also in the medical field, right? So Thaddaeus also as well does a standardized patient work. So we basically pretend to have, we have a scenario, or basically a biography of a character, right, who has a particular disease. And we present to these, to medical students, and they have to learn to deal with this. Usually it's an interpersonal thing. And we get to just be a human being and respond the way human beings respond and give them feedback. So that's one way that a theatrical approach can be used to sort of help training. But in therapy, and this is, I want to widen it, I mean, it's not just role play, but also things like storytelling and what else would you use in your toolkit, so to speak?
Use anything that's available. It's improvised. What is it? What's available? I mean, it may be the puppy in the family. It may be the grandfather who loves to draw, and that becomes the connection with the person who's in pain to talk about what the grandfather does in his drawings. How do you get there? How do you think about what you want to put on a piece of paper? It's whatever you can, or I can, any of us. This is what we do. This is our life, right? We improvise. We try to make connections with other people, and so it's not, for me personally, therapy is another word for life. It isn't really, because our goal, I think, as human beings, is to make connection and to be empathetic, to be compassionate, to be kind, loving, considerate, all those things that I believe humans are very good at if we work at it. And so role play is something I use a lot, not only with my therapy patients per se, but just in conversation with friends. Well, why don't we play it out? Let's see what's possible. Let's imagine what it could be.
So this is something you'll do?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
How does that, do you find most people willing to do it?
No. Absolutely. It's because it's not something that feels like I know how to do. It's something that we immediately, if you're like me, I immediately, in the situations where I've not done it before or I'm not familiar with it, I immediately go to, well, I'm not good enough.
Right.
And that's where we all start. That's where we're all, we all came from, is the belief that we're not good enough. That we didn't get it right, or we didn't get the manual, or we didn't get, we don't have it, don't have enough to make me believe I'm acceptable and allowed to be in the mix. And so much of what I use in my work with people is imagination and projection. What if? How about if we look at it from this perspective? What could you see as possible? And it takes some encouraging, it takes some reassuring. You can talk about this. We're just going to imagine together.
I can see that a lot of people entering into therapy would have a difficult time believing that anything this woo-woo is going to be practical at all. And how do you address that reluctance to? So it's like in this case, they might be saying, you're asking me to daydream myself out of my depression or whatever it is that I'm going through.
Oh yeah, no, I don't go there. I mean, I don't go to outcome, because I don't know what the outcome is. I'm not asking you to daydream or do anything to get out of where you are by any means, because I don't know the road to take, and they don't either. But I do know that using qualities like imagination, suppose is a great beginning. Suppose you, or suppose we It's kind of like the child's game or the scouting game, I guess it is. You know, we're going on a camping trip. What would you take? And everybody gets to choose or gets to pick what they want to take on their trip. It's kind of in that environment, that sort of sense of, oh, well, I can think, all right, I can think about that. What would I take? I'd take Oreos. You know, immediately. What else would you take? Well, I guess I would take a sleeping bag. Well, why do you need a sleeping bag? Well, I want to be able to sleep and I want to be warm. Ah, we're getting to safety now.
Right.
Self-protection, self-care. Things that don't necessarily seem to go with where we started in the work we're doing, but nonetheless, it brings up the opportunity to begin to talk about self-care.
It's, instead of asking directly about it, you're discovering. I mean, it's an invitation, like what if, what if. So I was going to bring Thaddaeus into the discussion here too, because I was curious as someone who's been acting for a long time, what role do you think the use of your imagination to do your work has played in, what effect has that had in your life? That's a pretty big question. You can answer it in any way you want.
Yeah, that's a huge question. I mean, I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier about, you know, improvising, about, you know, the way that we all improvise our way through life, right? And part of the impact that that being a performer has helped me is to be able to sort of move through life with this very active choice to improvise through each moment, right? Like, I might be in those moments thinking, you know, like, well, I don't know this, or I'm not good enough, or I don't know what I'm walking into. But because I find, you know, improvisation and performance to be sort of a safe container for that, I can just, you know, decide that whatever situation I'm walking into is just some singing, and we'll see how it plays out.
When I'm talking to people about, when I'm encouraging people to do some role play or engage in something like that, sometimes I find it helpful to remind them that we do this instinctually. You know, we're always, when we're preparing for instance, a difficult conversation, or something we're anxious is coming up, or something we would like to have happen, we can't help but, our wheels are constantly turning. And we may actually bring it out. We may find ourselves talking to ourselves in the car, you know, or looking at the mirror and imagining the conversation. Or maybe in those minutes right before we go to sleep, it might be rolling around our head. But we're playing these things out. We're imagining different outcomes. We're trying to anticipate problems and be prepared for them. But we don't do that very consciously, you know. But it is something we do instinctually. I mean, have people had that experience? I mean, how many people will fess up to that? I mean, I talk to myself a lot, you know. I try to prepare for these things.
And we talk to the other person, and they're not there.
Right.
But we're planning, we're
right.
preparing, we are playing the role. Yeah.
And that's a creative process, too. I know I hear people say so many times that they're not creative people. Because they have a very narrow view of what creativity is. You know, or maybe because they do it naturally or they've never had it labeled, it can't be that. Right. So I was going to ask you also about storytelling. I've become really curious about that. I kept a journal for like the past 40 years. I mean, one of the reasons I kept the journal was because I was obsessed with I wanted to make sure I got the facts right in my life. I wanted to remember them. And going back to journals of the past, I realized a lot of the stories that I've been telling were highly inaccurate. The stories I've been telling about my life, you know, how I came to this, how I met my wife, how I found theater or whatever, were really, I mean, I went on some really wild tangents. You know? You can kind of see where, it's almost like a game of telephone with myself, right? And it used to disturb me. And then I remember I was actually sitting in a therapist's office, and I saw a magazine, I think it was like Psychology Today or something, and in the front it was all about personal narrative. And it was all about consciously, I didn't have time to read the whole thing, but it was all about consciously sort of manipulating or telling a story to yourself about yourself or about things that were happening in order to, I guess, have a healthier don't know how to describe it exactly. Maybe you can help me out here, but do you know what I'm talking about?
I do,
Yeah.
I do indeed, yes, yes, yes. And we do, we're all having our own narrative all the time. We're always talking, we're always assessing, we're always judging.
Right.
We're always putting ourselves down or trying to lift ourselves up, and this is going on constantly. It's never ending. The quality of storytelling, I think, is true for all of us. We don't have to be honest in it. Where did we think are feelings honest, or they're just feelings?
Right.
There's the phrase about, feelings come and go, like thoughts, they come and go. And when I'm journaling, I might be writing those thoughts, not having a sense of their being necessarily put to a court,
Right.
A jury.
Right.
But they're my experience of it in the moment.
Right.
And of course, I'm sure this is true not just for me, but for all of us. If I tell you my story of my family, and my brother is sitting here listening to my telling my story of my family, we have entirely different stories.
Yeah.
And we know that there is no real one and false one.
Right.
Because we're always intermixing. I don't even know what's real. And especially when I go into memory. Oh, well, that happened that way. And then I have some witness back here saying, oh, hell no, it didn't. That's not how it went down at all.
Truth is personal.
It is exactly, yeah. It's mine.
Right.
It's my truth, not necessarily someone else's.
I remember one of the difficult things about learning to listen to people, really listen and not judge, was taking them at their word and acknowledging that whatever they're saying in the moment is true, even if we don't want it to be, even if it's uncomfortable. I mean, kids will, there's always that moment when a kid first says, I hate you, to your parent or some relative. And there's always someone chiming in almost immediately, oh, you don't feel that way. And it's really a terrible thing to say. Because they do feel it. In the moment, they do feel that way. It doesn't generally reflect how they feel about this person. Or it might, who knows. But in most cases, but it's true in the moment.
It's true for them.
Right. And it needs to be acknowledged as that.
Ideally, but then the listener is unable to acknowledge it because it's too painful for that parent or that sibling or whoever's listening.
Right.
Yeah.
Whenever I hear stuff like that, I always think that's really, really resonates. And people, it's a hard thing to admit feeling something you're not supposed to feel, something inappropriate. Like those moments, for any parents out there, and you don't have to raise your hand, but there have been moments when I've hated my kid. I just hated him. I absolutely did. And I would never say that to him. I sure wouldn't say it to a crowd of strangers. Never. There was a comedian, I remember, it was this hysterical bit he did about, he's talking about his daughter, who I think was 5 or 6, and he calls her an asshole in the moment. And it's hysterical, and the laughter, it seemed so true in the moment. I would never have said that. I remember playing it for my wife, and her reaction was to laugh, and she immediately covered up her face, like, I can't feel that, that's not appropriate. But it was true.
The catharsis of it.
Yeah.
Let it go. Let it be what it is. And
Right.
it doesn't mean anything unless we put one there. We put a meaning to it.
Right.
And make it wrong, make it unacceptable, make it whatever. And that's what we do all the time. We censor ourselves constantly and each other. Yeah. Yeah.
So, how might you use narrative in a therapy session or in some sort of counseling session? How might you encourage someone to tell a story that might be helpful?
Well, a lot of the work that I've done has been to tell their story and write it. Write it down, and write it down again, and write it down again. And people who I've gone through this process talk about how as they process the words they've written about their history, their story, their experiences, they discover that as they keep drilling down into it by repeating it, writing it again, or telling it, doesn't necessarily have to be written, but telling it, they discover there's a lot more under there that they didn't really notice. And it begins to filter, percolate up into the surface. And they say to me, to one another, oh, I didn't see that that was connected to that. And what I thought was happening wasn't happening at all. And so the opportunity to have the narrative, share the narrative, massage it, knead it like dough, to figure out what's in there, brings it up to a place where we bury so much unconsciously. And of course, that's another whole piece. You know, Freud showed us and told us there's an unconscious going on here. It's really, what? What do you mean there's an unconscious? I'm conscious.
Well, we're mysteries to
Actually,
ourselves.
not really. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So what would, let me ask you this. So what would the role of a play like this have in?
This is brilliant. This is brilliant tonight. Very brilliant, because you're using improvisation, because you're pulling your audience into it by asking, just naming them, assigning a role. Who would you be?
Do you think how significant do you think that is? And I'm not just, it's such a simple thing.
It's very simple, yes.
And this play certainly could have been done just as direct address with no one else's involvement. We could have kept everyone in the dark, right? As you're used to being. You're not used to being able to see each other, right? Or having the performers see you. I don't know if you're aware of that. If you're up there in the lights, you can't see a thing out there. You're speaking into a void that occasionally laughs or cries or yells or screams. Right? It's an odd experience. It can be very unsettling to see you all there. Yeah, and he can. Yeah, can attest.
I can attest. Yeah, absolutely.
However, if you're Thaddeus, and if you experienced in that mode of improvisation, it's no longer them versus me. It's no longer we and them. It's us, and we become a community, and we become this village, raising the awareness through this dialogue we're really having. It's beautiful, beautifully done. Yeah, it's very effective, and everybody gets to play a part, and not only play a part, but take a part of it and become a part of it. I mean, I don't know, I'm sure I'm not the only one who was very moved by this work tonight. It was brilliantly done. And the layers of it.
What do you all think? I'd love to get some comments on it, because this is the first time I've done a show quite like this. But what was the experience like watching people, non-professionals, get involved with Thaddeus up here? How did it feel?
Most of us live around non-professional people. I mean, it was us.
Yes.
It was us. It was
So you saw yourself in everyone that...
Exactly. We're not performers. We're just people who were going to react to the moment or the situation or whatever. So yeah, I mean, making us a part of it is walking into a store and seeing all the other people shopping or classroom or whatever. You know, it was important to feel a part of it as a person, not a performer.
Right.
But some people were so good that I felt they must have rehearsed with you all. But no, they didn't. Yeah, and I'm wondering, do you experience the play differently every time you do it because of the different?
What you can't see is Jay chuckling behind his mask. Yes, it is as different from night to night as you can possibly imagine, and honestly make it even more. Because there are different degrees you know, of participation that any one person, you know, is willing to do, or different things that they say. I mean, our vets and our dads and our Mrs. Pattersons say different things from. Yeah, you know, sometimes they are really moved to try to connect or to comfort. You know, and then you know, like other times, you know, there is also like another remove that is also really interesting, you know, to experience. But it's I mean, it's an experience that I've never had, you know, performed before. Is to do a show with a room full of people who are also part of this story, who are helping me tell the story in this particular way. And it's absolutely different every single time.
Was the play written this way, or did you all incorporate the participation by the audience?
Oh no, it was absolutely by design. I mean, we didn't do that. I mean, there are script changes that we made just to, I mean, but with permission from the playwright.
Right.
It's meant to be as local as possible. It was written by an Englishman, so for instance, all the Britishisms were taken out. Yeah, milk and cookies was, you know, tea and biscuits, right? And there were a number of ones
putting their car in the car park, we were going to hospital. And,
right.
You know,
it wasn't university, it was, you know, college. You know, so a lot of things had to be changed to it, but by permission, and it doesn't change the story at all, it just makes it more relatable, right? We didn't want that foreign element, right?
Yeah.
This is a story about whoever it is that's cast. It's very much a story about them. So.
And I didn't want to do it with an accent. That was from the very beginning.
Do you do a British accent?
No. That would have been funnier with like an Australian.
I was thinking about just right after the show, you were talking with someone, and the idea was, I think it was you, was it you, right? Yeah. We were talking about improvisation, right? And you said that if you had been in that position, you just wouldn't know what to say if you had to come up with something. Yeah. But what people don't realize about improvisation, that the improvisers, one of the improvisers, the things that they know that most people don't know, it's not a secret, it's just most people don't care. But is that anything that, no matter how a person responds, we look at it as an offer or a gift. You know, you cannot be wrong when you're improvising. In fact, the only way to be wrong is if you think you're wrong, and then you wind up running the other way. If you accept that everything you say is absolutely what needs to be said in the moment, you're golden. Yeah. You know? And you had to wrestle with a lot of that. A lot of people said things that were not expected and didn't quite necessarily fit perfectly into the narrative.
But they're always responding genuinely.
Yes.
Like with you know, the woman who was Mrs. Patterson tonight, like that's not scripted. You know, like that. She said what she needed to say in that moment to this man who was calling her on the phone, and that's what happened between us, right? So yeah, it's you know, she wasn't given the script before. I didn't know what she was going to say. I sure did. But she responded very truthfully in that moment. And it just, yeah, that made that interaction.
It worked because the therapist says as little as possible, right? And she was the psychopath.
Right.
Being a therapist. Yeah.
Who she sounded like to me was Dr. Melfi on The Sopranos. You know, you ask a question, what do you think?
Right. That was such a classic response. Yeah.
So tipped off.
I love it. That's the first person that's actually said that.
Yeah.
I mean, unless they've done something. Yeah.
She's probably been watching The Sopranos.
So this is I guess one of the things that I'm especially curious about, because I know that there's always a push at some point in schools to get the arts more integrated into, you know, sports. It's a done deal. We all love sports. Everyone is gung ho about them. Aside from, you know, any sort of injuries, you know, that may be of concern to people. Sports is something we are all in as a nation, for the most part. But the arts, it seems to be, it's always a harder sell. And I wonder, do you have an opinion about why you think that is? That sort of, those particular creative focuses, or foci? Yes.
Sports generate money for schools very often, and the arts don't.
Right. The amount of people going to see a school play is going to,
And so, sadly, that, and what you're talking about with storytelling and everything is more than just arts. It's part of mental health and another whole section of teaching in school with kids.
well, I think
Yeah, so there's an overlap, but again, it's not glamorous. Sports are glamorous. There's uniforms, there's crowds, there's hot dogs. There's nothing exciting about, a drama class, unless that's what you're really interested in.
You mean to the larger public.
Exactly,
It's harder for the...
Exactly. So the hard sell about getting people excited about it and getting it in the schools and everything, well, I think that's the way it should be. Again, it's a hard sell because it doesn't generate the same kind of thing a football or basketball or even a soccer team does for a school.
In terms of, you're talking, not just in terms of money, but also there's something...
There's no T-shirt that says, I'm an actress at the school. I mean, there's no uniform.
There are few, but few, the whole school isn't going to buy the Oklahoma T-shirt. Right?
It's a very different appeal. There's not a lot of dads saying, we're going to set the stage,
right.
Not tear the goalpost down or cut the, hoop around the whatever. It's a whole different thing about even including parents in schools. They're much more involved with sports. They can identify with it more easily.
Getting an image of a very proud father jumping up and cheering on his son as Willie Loman.
Yeah, I was just thinking when you said Oklahoma T-shirts, you probably sell more of those than you would Death of a Salesman.
You're probably But I used to make this point when people brought up sports, and especially with artists who were rather disdainful of sports. I would sometimes kind of get into sort of a chastising mood, and I would say, you know why the football is more popular than drama? They're telling a better story, and they're much more committed, and it's genuinely they're playing as if their lives depend on it. And there's something that gets you. I mean, I didn't grow up watching sports, on TV or anything. So, but the few times I played, it was very easy to get caught up in the game. Even now, I can get caught up in a kid's game as if my life depended on it. And there's something about that. Whereas when you're acting or when you're the skills, I don't know, that are involved in learning an instrument, or it's a lot more elusive, perhaps, or much more harder before you get that.
There's no winning in theater. Maybe you get polite applause, but there's no team winning.
Right.
With theater, it's a whole different mindset.
What do you think?
I was just going to say, I think The Voice has grabbed the quality of winning and made the arts very popular and very, very dramatic.
Right.
This show, The Voice, because we're all, I as a member of the audience, I'm rooting for different participants.
Well, they made it into a competition, right? They made
And
the arts
that's what makes football. It's back to win or lose, and that's the drama of the sport, is win or lose. So that's what keeps us connected to it.
That's a very good point. Think about any kind of, yes?
I actually, to play devil's advocate, I would say that that there is a lot of drama in sporting events that, and I'm like you, Jay. I didn't watch sports when I was a kid, and it was years until I did. And what hooked me into watching sports is somebody said, "Oh yeah, this quarterback is," and then just for the sake of the story, "Oh, this quarterback is great. Just lost his mom this morning." And then you go, "Oh gosh, I see how well he plays.
Oh,
Lost his mom." And I would venture to say that if there were just two teams that you knew nothing about any of the players at all, it's a less exciting sport. But the reason that the color commentators are there is to tell you, is to hook you into one team or the other, to give you some story, some background. Oh man, this kid, he comes from a really poor family, and this might be his last hope to try. And so you're as a black male, I remember, sitting in family watching a game and go, they got a black quarterback, and then you're going to cheer for this team because they got a black quarterback and they got a black coach, and so you're going to cheer and so that becomes the drama that hooks you into watching it. If they were just two teams, one team wearing purple, one team wearing orange, I think you would be less excited about it. But because the color commentators tell you what is happening dramatically between each team, right? This player's a hothead and he hates his quarterback.
It's the Olympics too, right? Isn't that 80% of the Olympic coverage? It's all about the story. We would love the underdog stories. We would love all those, His entire family was slaughtered this morning,
Right.
See if he can win the 800. Right? And he does, and we're like, insanely, we just can't even contain our joy, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's what hooks us.
Well, but my point then with the theater is that so few performers, especially at that when we're young, really throw ourselves into a game the way even casual athletes will. There's something about, maybe it's just something about just being chased by someone who's larger than you, or maybe it's very, but that could be very. I remember watching the 1986 World Series, just because my roommate was watching. Did I tell you this story? Yeah. But I was just kind of walking in and walking out. But before long, I was just going, yeah, go! I didn't know what I was even saying. But I got really caught up in it. And I didn't know anything about the players. I just could see that they had 100% of their attention on getting, their focus was incredibly thrilling. Incredibly thrilling. But we were talking about the power of story in the section.
We're talking about, I think that's what we're really here. That somehow you get caught up in the story of it.
Yes?
I think a big word that distinguishes the two here is vulnerability. Because I think when you're participating in the arts, it's self-expressive. So you are emotionally vulnerable. I think probably in a way that you're not as emotionally vulnerable, maybe physically vulnerable, but not so emotionally vulnerable when you're playing sports. I don't know, I haven't played sports much. But I do think creativity really, if you're really being creative, you have to be exposed, you have to be vulnerable, you have to be raw. And which would you choose more easily? Ordinarily.
Right. It's a good point.
And how much support do you get to choose one, and how much support do you get to choose the other? And I think you need a lot of support in both. But I'm not sure you always get it in the creative, artistic expression.
Yeah, it's not going to be the same.
And culture in general doesn't get the parade for you. In sports, yes, but not in the artistic arena.
Well, it's the 1% of people who manage to reach the very heights of any sort of performing art, mainly in act, right? Or in music. These are the people that we get very caught up in those stories. But for those of the 95% underneath them,
the school kids,
right? Or even there are thousands of artists whose name you'll never know but manage to make a living. I think 3,000. So.
what's the difference for the two of you in being an actor and playing off another actor in a play, and being a solo actor and playing off an audience, trying to evoke something or make something happen, but knowing that a good hunk of this is going to be dependent on the audience? It seems to me that those are very different. I'd love to hear you talk about what it's like to be solo versus playing off someone who is, as a professional, as a standardized patient, you know what that's like. You play off the doc.
It's a great question. Yeah, that is.
Well, I mean, like initially, I know that, you know, playing against, you know, an audience member, they're not going to upstage me. So,
well, they might try.
They might try, but like, I've got all the text. So, no, that's a really fantastic question. You know, I think, you know, when playing a scene like with another actor, it actually sort of connects me back to what we were, you know, talking about with sports, is that there can be either a very strong sense of teamwork or there can be competition, right? And that's going to change from cast to cast and person to person. But you know, playing against an audience member, it's much more supportive. It's very playful. I'm not here to embarrass anybody, and you know, I hope that, you know, anybody that I bring in also feels safe enough to play. And if the point of that is to play, then what we're giving each other is something that can only be additive. Yeah.
That's great. So, unfortunately, we're just about at our time. I want to thank you all for coming and taking part in this this conversation. I want to thank Linda.
You're the ones that make this happen. Really, truly, you're the ones who came. You're the ones who wanted to be. You're a part of this.
So give yourself some applause. How about that? You couldn't stay home. It would have been much easier to stay home, but no. You braved the wilds of North Raleigh. Let's hope you can make it home. I have faith in you. So, and thanks also to Thaddaeus Edwards.
Future actor, Chacula.
Y'all have a good evening, and tell people about the show. We still have 2 more left, and I'd love to see every seat full.